Hey everybody, this is my 4th video blog, and this time I'm going to be counting down what I consider to be the top 10 most underrated or underappreciated horror films of all time. So, either these films are obscure, forgotten, or just unfairly criticized by most people. It was really tough narrowing down the choices to 10. At one point I think I had about 40 films written down, and I just crossed off one by one until I had 10 left. To make it easier for myself, I decided to just focus on American films because just about every foreign film could be considered underappreciated in this country. So let's get started with number 10. Written by the same genius who gave us Night of the Creeps and The Monster Squad, and directed by the same man who helmed the first 2 Friday the 13th sequels, and with a cast that includes Night Courts, Richard Mole, and Cheers as George Wendt, this mid-80s horror comedy is a crowd pleaser for so many reasons. While revolving around pretty deep themes like a little boy's sudden disappearance, an elderly woman's suicide, and the post-traumatic stress disorder caused by the Vietnam War, this movie has a really playful spirit, and at its core just wants us to have a really good time, so it pulls no punches with its goofy-as-hell creature effects, hilariously out-of-place pop songs, and outrageous sight gags. Even among all the silly shenanigans is a level of artistry that makes this house fascinating to explore. Closets and mirrors become portals to other universes, axes and knives float through the air, and chimneys function like vacuums to suck humans up. This movie was followed by House 2, The Second Story, which is one of the most clever titles for a sequel I can think of. And then came the completely unrelated The Horror Show, which for some odd reason was called House 3 in certain countries. And then came House Part 4, which is not necessary, but it does have the best scene that you'll ever see involving a demonic pizza. Just look up House 4 Pizza Man on YouTube and you will not be disappointed.
Dr. Steve grows hardy creatures, lets them run into the night.
I don't think the Funhouse gets enough respect because, with the possible exception of Something Wicked This Way Comes, no movie has done a better job in capturing our fascination with carnivals. We see our 4 teenage protagonists leave their comfortable suburbia to enter the world of the carnies, and at first it's all rides, games, and cotton candy, but then they drift into seedier territories with eccentric barkers, animal mutations, female strippers, and freak shows. And then they come up with the brilliant idea to spend the night in the Funhouse, and the events that follow somewhat justify why my childhood babysitter told me that this was the scariest movie she's ever seen, and that of course made me want to rent it immediately, and fortunately I had really cool parents that allowed me to do so. And though it does have its flaws, like the creature being shown too much and not looking that convincing, I will admit that certain scenes are still almost unbearably suspenseful. And Tobe Hooper has a great attention to detail here, and he fills the frames with interesting props and lighting, and the acting is strong all around. And when the game is over and the inflatable fat woman sings for the last time, we feel a sting that stays with us for the remainder of the night. Next up is the H.P. Lovecraft adaptation that takes the familiar plot of college students entering a supposedly haunted house, getting locked in, unwisely splitting up, and one by one being eviscerated by a hideous creature. But it's a tad more sophisticated than its companions, mostly because of the scene-stealing character Randolph Carter, an intellectual who prefers to read old books by candlelight even as the body count increases. It does a great job in making the house terrifying, using low-key lighting and classic haunted house touches like distant screaming, heavy pounding, footsteps, and door slamming. Most importantly though, it has a great-looking creature that's unlike anything I've ever seen, and up until the climax, the director wisely teases us with only slight glimpses of her, which arouses our curiosity and makes this game of hide-and-seek all the more fun. Also, this movie has plenty of gore, nudity, and silliness too, so it's a really good movie to watch late at night with your friends after a few drinks. 1981 was the greatest year ever for werewolf movies, as it gave us the genre faves An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, and a few years later came this hypnotic, nightmarish retelling of Little Red Riding Hood from the director who would later be known for The Crying Game and Interview with the Vampire. The Company of Wolves stays so loyal to its dream-within-a-dream narrative and fairy tale authenticity that even when a character peels off his skin and Angela Lansbury gets decapitated, it looks so much more fascinating and magical than grotesque. It's a gorgeous-looking Gothic movie that juggles psychosexual undertones with Freudian symbolism, but it never forgets its creature feature roots, and it has some really kick-ass werewolf transformations. So if you haven't seen The Company of Wolves, please check it out. It is quite something. happy happy that Psycho 2 is widely regarded as one of the best horror sequels of all time because it really is a wonderful movie. It did very well at the box office, so it was no surprise that a Psycho 3 arrived a few years later, but sadly this one was nowhere near as successful. It's definitely not the masterpiece that Part 2 is, but I don't understand all the negative reviews and the 4.9 rating on IMDb because this is still a very solid picture with a lot to offer. It has a completely different tone from the previous two installments, often going in really zany directions, and showing a lot more nudity and violence. It's full of creativity, colorful characters, and stylish cinematography, and you get a much clearer sense of what it feels like to be in the small, hot, humid California town, especially since we've already been introduced to some of the minor characters like Sheriff Hunt and the employees at the diner. It starts off with someone screaming, "There is no God!" And then we're introduced to a suicidal nun and a wannabe rock and roll star, and the movie patiently lets them develop into really interesting characters, even before we get any glimpses of Norman in the Bates Motel. Anthony Perkins said he would only return for Part 3 if he could also be the director, and he does such a great job in both roles, so it's truly a shame that this film's failure pretty much destroyed his chances of directing other films. And like Psycho 2, the music in this movie plays a large role and hits all the right notes. I think Psycho is the greatest horror series of all time because the final entry, Psycho 4, is every bit as underrated and underappreciated as Part 3. There's also a really good documentary that came out last year called The Psycho Legacy, which serves as a deserving tribute to all four movies. I feel that this romantic ghost thriller could have had major box office potential. Nothing about it to me feels like it should have been direct-to-video and ultimately given no publicity or a chance of success. It also deserves to have a title that stands out a little bit more than Haunted. It stars the always engaging Aidan Quinn as a professor who specializes in debunking paranormal activity, a subject that he's obsessed over ever since his sister died tragically at a young age. He gets invited to the prestigious Ed Brook mansion after an elderly woman claims repeated hauntings. Once there, he meets the irresistible Christina and her two brothers, and to say that this is a dysfunctional family is an understatement. Kate Beckinsale gives her best performance in my opinion, and the supporting actors, Anthony Andrews and Sir John Gielgud, are also outstanding. This is one of the most elegant horror films I've ever seen, with gorgeous shots of idyllic British countryside, horseback riding along coast and waterfalls, and a rainstorm that's used to evoke happiness rather than dread or melancholy. This is a movie that expertly balances day and night scenes, romance and horror, and logic in the unexplainable. And it also has an achingly beautiful score by Debbie Weissman, which makes me really wish that a soundtrack of this movie was available. H.P. Lovecraft stories are notoriously difficult to translate into cinema, and on the rare occasion when it's done well, it deserves lots of attention and respect. Dagon should have been huge, but instead it was denied a theatrical release, and it only seemed to be appreciated by those who read Fangoria and Rue Morgue every month. It's about a married couple who get shipwrecked off the coast of Spain and have to enter a decrepit fishing village for help. From this point, the movie delivers one suspenseful scene after another as our very likable protagonists discover that this is the most inhospitable fishing village on the entire planet, and not only because it never stops raining. The mysterious townspeople, insanely creepy imagery, and exciting chase scenes are taken directly from one of my favorite Lovecraft tales, The Shadow over Innsmouth. Stuart Gordon, who also gave us many great films like Reanimator, Dolls, and From Beyond, obviously put his heart and soul into Dagon, and I think it's an amazing piece of work. Another really underrated H.P. Lovecraft movie, in my opinion, is The Resurrected, starring Fright Night's Chris Sarandon and directed by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien and directed The Return of the Living Dead. And a couple other Lovecraftian movies that I think deserve a lot more respect are In the Mouth of Madness and Necronomicon, Book of the Dead. Alright, so this was one of my favorite movies when I was a kid, and it's had a special place in my heart ever since I saw it for the first time on USA's Saturday Nightmares when I was in second grade or so. And I've had a blast over the years introducing this obscure movie to friends, and they've all seemed to really enjoy it. So I've been really mystified as to why it usually gets such lousy reviews. I'll just never understand that. It's about a group of friends who are driving around late at night, and they eventually find a spooky mansion next to a graveyard. It looks deserted, and since they have nothing else to do, they decide to break in and party. Unfortunately for them, deep inside the mansion dwells a sorcerer who is trying to revive his deceased bride by using the life essence from other people or something. He unleashes an army of creatures upon the partygoers, and the variety here is what makes this movie so much fun. You'll see a slithering gremlin, an oriental spider lady, wind-breaking muckman, a man-cat with a hook for a hand, a grim reaper, a fire-breathing witch, hundreds of zombies, and a whole lot more. I also have to give this movie props for its amazing special effects, wonderful soundtrack, and for having one of the coolest looking haunted houses I've ever seen in a movie. There is also some really excellent comic relief, mostly provided by the character of Rich, who for some reason carries around a hand puppet everywhere he goes. So yeah, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you people, because this movie rocks. Spookies has been criminally denied a DVD release, but you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. If you have a certain fondness for The Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, and Edgar Allan Poe literature, then you absolutely must check out this classy 1945 British anthology of creepy tales. It starts off with a man who sees a house that he's certain has appeared in many of his dreams, and he can't resist going inside and meeting those who live there, hoping to figure out what it all means. From there, everybody takes turns sharing their personal experiences with the supernatural, and all of these tales are engaging and eerie in their own way. Watching this movie feels like you're sitting around a campfire with your closest friends, listening to some excellent scary stories while letting your imagination go wild. This is certainly one of the strongest horror anthologies I've ever seen, ranking right up there with Creepshow, Tales from the Dark Side of the Movie, and Trick or Treat. And it also has one of the most surreal and satisfying endings I've ever seen. At first glance, this may look like your standard formulaic slasher picture, but Tourist Trap is anything but conventional. This is another one that I was lucky enough to see when I was a little kid. It was on that awesome USA show Saturday Nightmares, and fortunately the reviews and the horror community have been much kinder to this one than they have been with Spookies. Borrowing elements from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Carrie, Tourist Trap is about a group of travelers whose car breaks down, and then they're helped by the lonely and southernly friendly Mr. Slauson, who is wonderfully played by Chuck Connors. For years, Mr. Slauson's been living quietly in his out-of-business museum with a wax statue of his deceased wife and several mannequin friends. This character inherits the same sympathetic kookiness that made Norman Bates such a fascinating character, but instead of Mother living in the towering house, this time it's his brother Davy. This movie is really suspenseful and has an odd, beautiful, dreamlike quality to it, and I was happy to hear that this is one of Stephen King's favorite movies. And this was the first DVD I ever owned. I was a late bloomer to get into the DVD world because I had so many VHS tapes. I was a little apprehensive. But many years ago I was browsing in that movie store Suncoast, and I saw that they had released Tourist Trap on DVD with special features. So I had to buy that immediately, and then like 10 minutes later I bought my first DVD player. So yeah, I really love this movie, and I think if you call yourself a horror fan, you need to check it out if you haven't already. And lastly, I just want to mention that this movie has one of my all-time favorite movie scores. I think it's really beautiful, and I'll post the YouTube link in the info section of this video so you can listen to it, and hopefully you'll like it too. Alright, well, I hope that wasn't too painful. Right now, I'm just going to list some other films that I think deserve more recognition, and these are all films that I have not mentioned in any of my previous blogs. Waxwork 2, Lost in Time, Andy Warhol's Dracula, Black Sabbath, Night of the Creeps, Slither, A Chinese Ghost Story, Return of the Living Dead Part 3, Idle Hands, Lemora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, Vamp, Dolls, Gothic, The Midnight Hour from 1985, never mind, I've already mentioned that one in a previous blog, Stagefright, The Reef, May, Scarecrows, The Laughing Dead, Grotesque from 1988, Don't Look in the Basement, American Gothic, Leprechaun 2, The Howling 5 Rebirth, The Gate, Tale of a Vampire, Dance of the Damned, Two Evil Eyes, Making Contact, Dark Angel, The Ascent, Clownhouse, and a very awesome film from 1977 from Japan called House. It'll be called Hausu on the DVD. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Alright, so thank you for watching this video. Please let me know if you have any obscure favorites because I can always use a good recommendation. See you next time. Thank you.